a couple hours later, she called and said that they did a CT of my dad's head or an MRI of my dad's head, and he had a brain tumor. Mom, the house is on fire. During like recovering from the fire, my son in rehab, and my one son had heart surgery. And so then he was like, it's time for you to write a book.
Hi, and welcome back to Old School. Today, our teacher is going to be Lea Turner. She has had not a lifetime of grief, but certainly packed into a very short time, quite a bit of grief and loss. And she is the author of a book that will be coming out in June 25th of this year, called The Freedom to Feel, Finding God in the Midst of Grief and Trauma. And she is coming on today for us to talk about what she has walked through, the burning down of a home, the loss of a parent, struggles with a child who has addictions. It's just a lot that has gotten kind of crammed into a very short period of time, and then felt compelled to write a book about it, or the Lord asked her to as well. And she was able to express what she was going through. And a lot of times we on the outside of things people walk through want to label things. And she talks about something called ambiguous grief, which relates more to the loss of a process or things, or a situation, versus the loss of an actual human. So it's been really an interesting opportunity for us to have her here today, and I would like you to welcome to class Lea Turner. I am going to welcome you to class. I do call it Old School, and I call the folks who come on my teachers, because I want, like I said, I want to understand from other people too, how we work that together for good, how we all came to our pain or our trauma or whatever we've gone through physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and where we made that connection to come through. And it's like forgiveness or grace. Those are doled out daily. That is not something that's a one-time I dream of Jeannie transaction where it's all good and we're all fine now. And I love that. And I love hearing other people's stories about that. So what I'd really like to start with is your faith journey and how it got you to this point where then you were called to write The Freedom to Feel.
Okay. I grew up in a traditional Methodist church. I didn't become a Christian, like where I gave my complete self to the Lord, until I was in college. All Methodist churches are different, but where I grew up, it was very works based. So I grew up believing God would like, he blessed me when I was obedient, and he, pulled away when I wasn't. So it was very like a distant God to me. So when I was in college, I went to a Christian college. I had an encounter with God at a worship night there, and I just surrendered my life to him. And then my life
Amen.
began to change. I was I was running when I was in high school, like just, all the things like lots of boys, and, some getting into some trouble, but I just was lost. So then when I gave my life to the Lord, I just felt this freedom in him, and life worked out very well. My husband, I graduated from college. I got my nursing degree. I got right into a program at a cardiac unit. I worked as a nurse for 5 years. My husband went to med school. Everything was like smooth sailing. And I grew in the Lord, and I didn't have a lot of trials in my life up until 2019 is where my story begins in my book on grief and trauma. 2019, I get a call. Did you want me to keep talking about this?
Yes.
Or was that okay?
This is absolutely. This is
Okay.
absolutely.
I
your
didn't know if I
story.
was going beyond the question.
No.
2019, I got a call from my mom. I was on a girls' trip, and my parents had been healthy. My dad was struggling with some sinus issues, but nothing antibiotics couldn't fix, we thought. So I get a call from my mom, and my dad had fallen and they were in the ER. So I'm like, okay. So then a couple hours later, she called and said that they did a CT of my dad's head, or an MRI of my dad's head, and he had a brain tumor.
Mm.
And at that point, we didn't know like what it was or anything, but that's when my world like started caving in. I never experienced grief. Like, I lost grandparents, but not my parents, and I was 40. I mean, it's still young to lose your parents. So he was sick for 8 months, and I helped take care of him. He had cancer that he got in Vietnam from Agent Orange, and it went really fast. He was very sick, but he went peacefully. So I
Mm.
lost my dad. Then we went into 2020 when we went through COVID. And so my dad died in June. And then in that April, my mom moved where we were. So she had left from spending the day with us at Easter. She went home, and I get a call from her saying she's bleeding. Now, she shouldn't be bleeding in her 70s. So we end up finding out that she has cancer. And this is only like 6 months after my dad had passed away. So
Mm.
she has to have surgery. She has a whole total hysterectomy. She's still alive. She's not in recovery. It has metastasized to her bone, but she's still here with us.
Mm.
So I started that process with her. And I will tell you, when I got that call and got off the phone with her, I sat down with my husband. I said, I do not want to go through this again. I don't want to sit through doctor's appointments. I'm exhausted. Like, I was exhausted from taking care of my dad, like helping taking care of my dad. So that was April. July, I was taking my mom to an oncology appointment, and I was driving back, and it was 2 hours away. So we're an hour into a trip. I get a call from my 14-year-old daughter. She is home with the three younger kids, babysit them, and she's like she's great with them. Stayed home with them all the time. And she calls and says, Mom, the house is on fire. I said, why? What do you mean the house is on fire? And she said, Mom, the house is on fire. I said, well, who's cooking something? Like, what's going on? Like, I couldn't process like what she was saying. So I get off the phone with her, and I call my neighbor, and I'm like, can you please go over? Abby says the house is on fire. Like, so my neighbor runs over here with two fire extinguishers and calls me and says, Lea, the house is gone, like, is completely gone. And I cry every time I tell the story.
Well, yes.
So my 14-year-old daughters had sat down in our living room, saw flames bellowing out from the attic, like out the window, called for her two brothers, grabbed her baby sister that was 3 years old out of her crib, and ran out the door. And seconds later, the house blew up into flames.
Praise the
So
Lord that she had
God,
her.
yes, God totally held back the fire until they got out. It was a miracle. She actually got a award from the fire department, which was really neat. But we lost everything. They didn't have shoes. They were in pajamas. Like, my daughter had her pajamas on. Like, we lost everything. Um, so then after that, we moved into a rental. We had great community. Grief, I can lead into this later now, but grief from that is totally different than grief from losing like a parent,
A
or
human.
a different type of grief. I learned later it's called ambiguous grief, where it's like a divorce. It's the same as a divorce. Like, you're not actually losing like a person, but you're losing like a part of you. This 20 years of our life we lost. I learned a lot in that time frame, because people don't know. I don't know how you walked through grief too. People don't know how to respond to that type of grief. So I learned a lot during that time. But then the story doesn't end. So then we moved into a rental. My oldest son at that time was 17, and he was already starting to spiral a little bit before the fire, like his grandfather's death and like I think COVID, everything. He just started getting into more and more drinking. He ends up going into like full blown addiction, and he's in and out of 3 different rehabs and trying to save his life. So we walked through that with him. And then in the midst of that, my one son has a heart defect, and I was in the hospital with him for a month. So during like recovering from the fire, my son in rehab, and my one son had heart surgery.
So
So
clearly the
that
Lord
was
believes
my
you are stronger
story.
than you think.
Yes. So then he was like, it's time for you to write a book.
Because I got nothing else to do.
Yeah, nothing else to do. Nothing else to do. But it helps healing. Writing
Oh,
helps heal you too.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that it
Yeah.
couldn't be more true. And that's exactly what a lot of the type of healing I talk about you know, until sometimes we do say it out loud. And I love that term. I've not heard that ambiguous. I went through a divorce. We were together 8 years and then married 20. And
Mm.
it was so bizarre because the infidelity was over quite a long period of time. So it wasn't even like when it ended, I was grieving him, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. I
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
grieving the thought
Mhm.
of what my life I thought was supposed to be at that time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that I was 56 years old when the divorce was final, and what just happened. Now, mind you, the part I have to play in our marriage was that I didn't ask the Lord about marrying him. I didn't pray if he was the man he had for me. He was not a believer. There were signs of infidelity before we got married. I mean, it was just on and on and on. So I couldn't look up to God and ask why I was going through all of this stuff. And I take my ownership in the fact that our marriage was not some pristine little thing before the infidelity came along. Not that that is my fault, and not that that's not something he needs to take ownership for. But you're right. It's a grieving, not even of like, I thought that's what my life should be, but I thought that was the kind of relationships and the connections that we were, you know, that is what I've been fighting at for and nurturing and trying to nurture. And clearly I
Mm.
was trying to resuscitate it from behind, and I was the only one. He was standing on the oxygen
Mm.
cord, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
So
goodness.
that is interesting. And I was going to ask you about that as well. You talk about your kids and you say 3 uh, that live with you and 2 in your heart. Is that how you phrased it?
Yes, we have 2 adopted children. So
Oh,
the
okay.
two youngest, 3 grew in my belly, 2 grew in my heart, is what I say.
That's how you say. Well, and it made me a little nervous. I didn't want to bring up, like, I didn't know if part of your grief and your loss had been that you had had miscarriages and so they
Oh
were in your
yeah.
heart. And
Yeah.
you know, and you were talking about when you said the fire, then I'm like holding my breath for your
Like it's
daughter to
I
get
lost
out with the
someone,
kid.
yeah. Yes.
So yay.
Yes, I have not walked that kind of grief. That is a whole nother level of losing a child. I haven't walked through that. But yes, I have 2 adopted children. So right now my children are 20, 18, 15. Then the 2 adopted are 13, and then 7. They have a baby basically.
Yeah.
So yes.
How awesome. And so
Mhm.
you rebuilt your house.
We did. We rebuilt the house on the same property. It took way longer than we expected because of COVID. We couldn't get supplies, we couldn't get workers. We were in a rental, and then that rental, like it was so quick. My husband and the guy like shook on it, and the guy like sold it out from under us. So we had to move the children to another rental. That was horrible. Because moving is hard, even if you're moving across town and you're moving stuff that you don't even care about. I mean, it's just because we just got used stuff, things that people gave us. We just, and they're like in a new environment again. That was very tough. Um, yes, I forgot the question. I just kept
No,
going.
that's okay. You rebuilt your house. Yeah, I mean, when I was young, we moved a lot. I make a joke in my book that it felt like we were in the witness protection program. We moved every 6 months and
Gosh.
nobody knew who we were. I mean, it might not have been that
Yeah.
fast every time, but it was a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
moving, whether it's 2 minutes away or to another state, it involves the same process, packing up
Mhm.
all your crap and moving it to wherever. And it's so funny. As a child, I thought we were making ridiculously crazy moves. And a child has to get used to like a new school, a new neighborhood. I mean, maybe you still had your friends in town and whatever, but it is a different vibe. And as an adult, I went and got a map of the area in Michigan where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
And I just pulled up the cities because that's all I knew at the
Mhm.
time. And we weren't 10 minutes from each other, but there wasn't the social
Oh,
media
wow.
or the play dates. So I never went back to the previous neighborhoods. It was so interesting to me, but it was fun to see it. And then my mom, after she passed away, I didn't know in some of her belongings that she had actually sat down with a book I had given her to write some things to my daughter, her granddaughter. And inside there was a piece of paper that had every address we lived at from the house I was born in, not just for me. She was writing these down. And it was
Yeah.
so cool. It's kind of brought a bunch of stuff together for me for the book also. So
Wow.
your house means something. And I know you're not supposed to like dive a bunch of meaning into things, but you lost your pictures too. And you lost your mementos and the things that mean that kind of speak to how you are a family and the memories you make together. And I understand how those things can be definitely a layer of grief. My mom lost two storage facility sto- uh,
Mhm.
stalls, if you will, and it was everything. It was all of our baby
Mhm.
pictures. It was all of
Mhm.
our everything, my Girl Scout sash and badges, everything. And so all I have in my house that has anything prior to when I lived in Hawaii, so probably around 21, is a picture of me when I was 5 that somehow
Mhm.
happened to be with my mom instead of with the other stuff.
Mhm.
And it was hard not to make her feel bad because she lost them because she couldn't pay for them anymore.
Mm.
But to then say, okay, well, the Lord knows the life we had, and this is the life we're going to have going forward. So let's do that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
It
so
strips you of it strips you of like vulnerability. Like you feel so vulnerable and like naked. Like when you get like if you get robbed, like that's how it feels. Like and like we knew we had the peace of God, but we felt like we lost like a part of our peace too. Like it's unsettling to not have like a home with your belongings and like, that comfy sweatshirt that you love to put on or like, and we would be like, did we lose that in the fire or do we still have that? And then you don't think about Christmas decorations. We had no Christmas decorations, like nothing. So we took the children on vacation during Christmas the first 2 years. So yeah, you just don't think about that. I would never have known if I never had had a fire of, how that would feel. Cause yes, we are told as Christians that we're not to put ourselves into our belongings, but they give us a sense of, you know, peace,
Well, and it's,
home.
yeah, if you think about it, like in the Old Testament, the temple, each of the items that were in there
Mhm.
had purpose and meaning and connection to your relationships with each other and with God. So, again, wasn't an altar and you weren't doing sacrifices in your home. I
Yeah.
don't think.
No, no, we were. But I've never thought of it that way. That's kind of a neat way to think of it, though.
Like hacking a chicken's head off.
Yeah, we weren't doing any of that, but yeah, I never thought of it. God, like in yeah, that's neat.
He's
Yeah.
very
Hmm.
detailed. He was detailed about the curtains,
Hmm.
about everything. I had done a Bible
Yeah.
study. I was a women's ministry director about the temple of God, and it was so his attention to detail is like the numbering of the hairs on our head. And I think if we let those things get out of control and become an idol and take away from our relationship with him, that's one thing. But it's another
Mhm.
thing when they are the lovely little sacraments and components of our family relationships. I think they're beautiful. And so I
Mhm.
know he'll bless you, like just like with Job. What he lost, he got back tenfold. So you guys
Yeah,
will.
he already has. God has already supplied above and beyond what we could ever imagine. So yeah.
That's awesome. So,
Yeah.
okay, we've gone through all of this, and now he says, write a book. So, were you obedient right away?
Oh gosh. I mean, I had already been writing. So I've been writing on my blog since 2016. I've traveled and spoke some. So this was just, it wasn't as scary as it would have been if it was like out of the blue. Um, but I got an email. I don't even know what year it was. I don't even know. I've been in the cohort, the writing. I got an email from Hope Books, and as soon as I opened it, I knew that I was supposed to write the book and write it with them. Like I just knew. And I called my husband and we talked about it. And he said, go for it. So we started it. And that was, well, it'll be 2 years this November. So that's how long it's taken me. I wrote all last year, and now this year will be, the book comes out in June, so this year we'll be marketing it, which is a whole nother ball game. ball
Yes.
game. But yeah, I
Okay, awesome.
it was
And
like, but I had to get through everything. I had to get through all of the emotion of it.
you knew right away that that is exactly because of your blog, or because you knew right away that that was going to be the subject matter, that it was going to be your story, what you had walked through.
Yeah, I just knew I had when I was when all this happened, I was, of course, as writers and learners, we want to like read other people's stories because we want someone to relate to our story. So during that time, I was so hungry for books on grief and trying to find books that I could connect to. And I found some really great books and I've read some really great books, but there's not a whole lot of books out there on like ambiguous grief or the grief. There's books on grief from like addiction, but not the grind of it. And so I was like, I think this would add to our talk on grief. This book would add to it, instead of just taking up space, because you don't want to write a book and take up space. So I was like, I have a unique situation that I've walked through with grief that I could add to this talk that we're already starting on grief. Because, grief is not something that's often talked about, but recently our culture is starting to realize like we have a problem. Like we are sweeping all of our emotions under the carpet instead of talking about them. Because, way back when my mom was growing up, like, my dad came home from Vietnam and they never talked about it,
Mm.
you know but they've realized over the years, which like that's not healthy at all. So I decided I needed to write a book from my perspective on grief.
Well, in all honesty, too, I think that we had a crossing over of different counselors and psychologists, and everybody was wanting to head in a direction where we all got to be victims, but then
Mm-hmm.
stay there and start
Mm-hmm.
blaming and start allowing really crappy behavior and choices because of what we've been through, as opposed to processing the grief rightly. And as a believer, yes, I believe that's through my faith worldview at lens. And so, yes. But I think even secularly, if we stop, letting it end with the fact of end with what happened to us, and allow for, our that those emotions, that grief, that if you want to be angry, God's a big God. He can take that
Mm-hmm.
too. But all of it, and I couldn't agree more. I think sometimes, like when you talk about the ambiguous grief, I think more than likely in society too, you can hear this kind of like on the periphery, is people will make themselves feel or make others feel like, well, that's not a, that's not bad enough. You got to have been beaten or killed or hit by a drunk driver. You got to have some horrible, horrible story to be able to talk about grief. And I don't think that's right at all. In fact, we probably have way more grief that isn't the physical loss of a human that we aren't addressing. So your book is very timely, and I think that it will resonate with so many people to be able to feel like, hey, I understand that, and I want to talk about that now. And what did she do to make it to the other side? So I think that's awesome, and I think that's a great foundation, and especially a good way to look at it. The Lord giving you that grace to see that it is all right for you to grieve that, and to put that out there so that other people can understand that too. One of the things that I do talk a lot about is how when physically we deal with mental, emotional, and spiritual things, that thread is so strong, that's so tight. Those wounds, like our anxiety, can kill us, can really make us very physically ill. So did a lot of like the fact that you were a nurse as you were walking through some of this help you with those connections between that pain and that grief, both physically and spiritually?
Yes. I think understanding it helped me seek out like care for my body. My husband's a OBGYN, so he's a physician. So I think if you're not aware, like what you just said, that we're a whole body, that, emotional, physical, everything's it together as a whole, that people don't realize that. So I talk about that in my book because I even got bladder spasms, and I was like, what is wrong?
What now?
And like my husband was like, this is from anxiety. Like, this is and I got them like it was like when our son had relapsed again, like I was like crushed, and I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't, and I was more able to accept medicine. Our Christian culture, especially, we want to believe it away, thank it away, get our gratitude journals. I mean, all of that is great, but there are periods of time that we need medicine to get through a time. And it's not a crutch, it's to get us through, like what you said, like not to stay stuck, but to go through. So I was able to recognize, like, I don't know if anyone would be able, if you didn't realize your body was a whole component, you may just suffer these bladder spasms. Is awful. It was so bad. I was like, am I going to have surgery? Like I didn't, but then when, things got better, and I took the medicine for the bladder spasms, but when things got better, I didn't need to take the medicine anymore, and they went away. It was from anxiety. Isn't that crazy how our body responds to?
Our bodies are so beautifully and wonderfully made. Last week, I had food poisoning. It started on Saturday night. I was having a great day. And it started at 9 o'clock at night, and it was upstairs till Sunday morning. So I'm thinking I'm coming out of the other side of it. Nope, took the elevator for the next 2 days. And all I could say to the Lord was, okay, you created my body to recognize poison and efficiently get rid of it.
That's right. Yeah.
I may not like that, but what would the alternative be? What if it kept it inside? It would have killed me. And probably back at some point in the world when people didn't know how to recognize that and maybe kept getting the poisoning because they kept doing the wrong thing, it would kill you. So I think our bodies are wonderful. I think the way we've been created, and we have so many backup systems that we have to try. And I don't mean committing suicide. We would have to try to kill this entity because each time something fails, there's another system that's here that's backing it up and helping us. And so, I mean, because you can see a bunch of people who look insanely unhealthy, and yet they're hanging in there. They hang in there into their 80s.
Yeah.
Because our bodies just are going to fight the good fight for us. I mean, when I was young, I could tell you which ovary I was ovulating from. That's how I was in tune I was with like my body and what was going on, which has come to bear wonderfully in my older age. You were talking about how your mom and what she was walking through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 2 years ago, so I was like 59, I started bleeding as well. And my OBGYN is like, that's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look. And there was a scare. They thought maybe I might have uterine cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through everything, and it turns out there were polyps and a cyst and some other stuff, but praise the Lord, not cancer. But still, well, you've walked this entire process with your mom. It makes you wake up and take notice. And then what that physical ailment does, I mean, it could be a chicken or the egg. Some anxiety I had been going through could have been part of its resultant behavior. But also the minute you find out about that stuff, now you're more anxious.
Yeah, I know. Yes. Yeah.
So there you go. Which
I
came
know.
first?
And the grief, and when you hold on to grief, your body does crazy things. It's fascinating. Fascinating how God created us.
Yep. And how to recover from it. I mean, it is possible. I think if we do, like you said, if we put all our eggs in one basket about it, we have to be sensible about it. Definitely staying in our relationship with Jesus and in that prayer. But sometimes what we're walking through, believe it or not, may be the better version of what could have been happening to us because of how we were created. You know what I mean? And if we weren't like as healthy as maybe we are, that we're walking through that and we're like, God, why aren't you answering me? And he is. He's not going to take away the free will and our choices and the consequences, but he has created us in such a way that his answer to our pain or our suffering or what we're walking through is that his creation is fighting back for itself. And so I know that's hard to take. I mean, people laugh at me with my stand on food poisoning, and I'm like, no, I'm really glad my body knew what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think this is awesome that you are willing to be vulnerable and transparent. And I can only imagine, because I have sat under the counsel of both secular and Christian counselors, and I'm not picking on counseling at all. I think it's awesome. But I think we need to be very careful when people are going to administer certain advice to make sure they understand the entire pictures, and that we don't say things flippantly when somebody is going through something that's very real. And whatever we need to do to walk that process. I'm not saying try and escape it, if the Lord's trying to teach us stuff, but still being able to express it safely and have people understand. And I think there's a whole world of people out there who will understand completely what you're talking about, and I think will benefit greatly. So I can't wait for it to come out in June. We will make sure that your episode is coming out around that time so we can have it be a plethora of people finding out about it and being able to head over there. I'll have the link in our show notes for you, as well as, do you have a copy, an advanced copy yet?
I do, yes.
That you could hold up?
Oh, hold it up. Oh,
No.
Lord. Somewhere on my desk. Yes, here it is.
Oh, awesome. The freedom to feel. And what is the subtitle?
It's Finding God in the Midst of Grief and Trauma.
Perfect. And it'll be out in June of 2024.
It'll be out June 25th.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So the last thing I do with every one of my guests is ask them for a nugget. Ask them what one thing you wish someone had either told you or that you had found out sooner.
I think that the season will pass. We always feel like the season we're in is going to be forever, but it won't be. It'll pass, and you'll get through on the other side. And if we continue to just press into Jesus, we'll get through the suffering, and it can be better. It can be better. And the grief does not stay forever. Yeah.
Well, and there's always a season. There's going to be the next season. So if we lament the season versus taking a look at what is being developed in us as we go through it, it could be, it would feel like a gerbil on a hamster, well, a hamster on a hamster.
I know. I think sometimes we fight that. We fight that season. We oftentimes fight the season we're in that we don't like. But if we pressed into it, and that's why, like in my book, it's like this suffering that we go through is actually an invitation from God. You know, it's an invitation to grow closer to him. So if we don't fight it, like on a hamster wheel, like we just want to fight it and get through it. But if we just pressed in, I feel like I didn't grasp that till like towards the end. I fought a lot of it, and it was grueling and heartbreaking and very hard because I was just fighting against what God was trying to do in my life. So yeah.
And I love the beginning of your story. You talked about you graduated from college and you got married, and you were, you even used the term, I believe, idyllic. And so everything was great. And I'm not saying that's why all this stuff happened. That isn't what I would intimate at all. And I have had people say that to me too. And I'm like, but I think that would make, once you do start walking through something like that, it is harder. Now you're learning from the ground floor how walking those types of seasons and walking through grief, it works, especially with our Savior. So he made you the perfect author for this. And
well, for the first time, I couldn't fix it. I couldn't fix it. Money couldn't fix it. A formula couldn't fix it. I even tried to fix my son. If I just sent him to this one rehab, he'd come home and he'd be perfectly fine, and then he'd go to college. But for the first time in my life, I couldn't fix it, or I couldn't change it. I couldn't, throw money at it. Nothing.
Right. You were not going to be the one to impact this situation.
No. No.
That we aren't God. It's kind of shocking. I know.
Yeah. It is very shocking. We sometimes believe that. I talk a lot about that in the book, because anyway, our Christian culture can teach us that we can control our situations. And, that's not who we serve. We don't serve a genie in the bottle. He's not a genie. We can't rub it and get our wishes.
Well, and people talk about, we can't control what happens to us. We can only control our response, which is true. But at the same token, if we honestly had control of even our response, we wouldn't have to keep going back through the same stuff.
Yes. No, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right, hon. Well, this is wonderful, and I can't wait for your book to come out. I'll be first in line to do a pre-order, and I will get all the information to you. You don't have a podcast, right? You have a blog?
I don't have my personal podcast. No, I have a website. My book is already in pre-orders.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and anyone can find that information on my website. It's just leaturner.com.
Okay.
I think you have all the information though.
Yep. All of that'll be in the show notes. Okay. And then if, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, well, I could get you the date that your episode is coming out. And if you want to put that on your blog or your website,
I
or whatever.
will, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will reach out as soon as I know when that's going to be. And I'll try and keep it as close to the 25th to just be just another layer. Yeah, I don't know that I get a lot of views, but not way more than I do actual subscribers. So if it touches even one person for them to reach out and get it, that's a good thing, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book. So.
It'll be September. That is the plan, the deadline.
September. So
unless edits or typesetting or something takes too long, before the end of September, I've been asked to speak at something in October, and I want to be able to take the book with me. So
yeah. Yeah.
And I will be praying for you and your kids. And I know that that's hard stuff. My daughter and I struggle right now. She's got diabetes, and I can't, hold a gun to her head for choices. And so we have to just love them and let God be the one that moves on their heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll be following you, and I'll support you when you come out. And if I can, I'll be on your launch team. If I have the time, if I have the, the bandwidth,
I understand.
Who knows what will be happening in September. But I I say to people, even if you share it one time, I'm honored. If you just share it one time on your social media, I'm on. So I'd be able to do that for sure.
Well, and that's another thing. I want to talk to like launch managers about this very thing because I've heard from some people that launch managers are very tight-fisted. They want you to fill out this form and be on the launch team. And I feel like I have a whole plethora of friends who would not do that, but they would be more than happy to go write me a review. So if they could be part of the launch in a different facet. So I think I'm going to manage a couple layers of this because I know I have several dozen friends who would go on Amazon and Goodreads or whatever and take care of a review for me that might not be willing to sit there week in and week out and post to social media and do all that crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I have I'm kind of doing what you're saying. I have a launch team, I have a launch manager, but I've said to every single person that signed up, like, if you just are here and do one thing, that's great. Like, don't feel obligated to have to do because I don't even want to post all that on my social media all the time. I mean, it gets a lot. So you're right. Like, just. Yeah,
I was on 3 teams at the same time at one point, and I was like, what happens at that point, in my opinion, is it's diluted. Any of my people that are looking are going to be like, okay, another book. So I like it if I can kind of spread it out, but I try to be as faithful to sister authors and stuff as I can, and a couple of guys. I've had a couple of men as well. So anyway, this was delightful, and I will be talking to you very soon.
Okay.
All right, hon.
Have a good day.
You take care.
All right, bye.
I want to thank you all for coming to class today, and you'll find all of the connection information for Lee in the show notes. The link to pre-order her book. It will be launching in June. If you would go to your favorite platform, rate, review, subscribe, even engage if some of the things that she said today resonated with you. We would love to hear from you and be able to connect you with her and maybe some of her events so you could go see her speak. So anyway, just run on by, give us a little rate, review, subscribe, click on the little bell. And thank you so much for spending time here today with us. And class dismissed. This episode of Old School with Michele Vrabel is brought to you by Brush with Greatness, a Hawaiian artist studio.